Frogger. It's Frogger. Oh man, and I love hearing that. Yeah, I remember being just a little kid playing that game on the computer and just getting lost in it. I never played it on an actual arcade cabinet until much later. And of course, I played all the other ports, plug and plays, Atari, so on. But anyways, welcome back to Memory Lane, and this week's destination is arcade classic Frogger. Now, I have about several more arcade classics I'm gonna do within the next several weeks. And there's tons, but I'm gonna start moving on to bigger things after these arcade ones. Just ones that have uh more stuff to offer, and I can provide much longer episodes. So anyway, as usual, do the facts, fun facts, stuff you didn't know, and then I'm gonna get onto the memories, talking about Frogger from my point of view. Now, Frogger's been around from the golden age of arcade gaming. It came out in 1981. It was it's a Konami game. Okay, Konami's been around forever. We all know Konami, and it was published by Sega. Hey, we all know Sega. We all know Sega. Sega published it for their for the arcade cabinets, and it was designed. Oh Jesus, the Japanese game, a Japanese name, everybody. So bear with me here. It was designed by Ta- is, Takahide Harima. I highly doubt his first name is pronounced that way. Takahide, Takahidi, probably Takahidi. I'm probably close with that one. But anyway, uh, that's the person that designed Frogger. And when it came out, it received so many positive reviews from critics that it was considered and still is considered one of the greatest arcade games ever. Ever. And 1 year after it released in 1982, Softline stated that it has earned the ominous distinction of being the game with the most ways to die. There are a lot of ways to die in this game, okay? You can get, was it eaten? You can fall into the water. You can get crushed by vehicles. There's a lot of ways you can die in this game. It's a game about strategy and patience. And if you have neither of those things, you're going to lose all your lives. And let's talk a little bit about the points. Not a whole lot, So you'll get 5 frogs, essentially 5 lives. The objective is to get on the other side without losing all your lives. If you get all 5 frogs over there, you'll get a bonus point, bonus points for that. I believe it's 50 points per frog once you make it to the other side. And every 20,000 points, you'll get a bonus frog. And it says right here, based upon my research, 99,990 is the max high score. So that's the highest you can get. You can't go anything higher than that. That may have changed since then with all the other updates and ports that this game has, but the original OG Frogger, that's the highest cap. You can't get up to 100,000. And so it's classic. It's Frogger. So you try to cross the street, and then there's this little river with like logs and other stuff you can climb, like crocodile heads. I don't think you're not supposed to touch those, especially when their mouths are open. And then something else, I can't remember what the third thing is. It's not ladybugs, is it? It looks like when I was a kid, I thought it was like a ladybug. But if you step on it, it'll go underneath the water. So you have to react very quickly just to get to the other side. And it's simple as that. Now there is a lady frog. If you get the lady frog over on the other side successfully, you'll get, I think, an extra 200 points. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I should have wrote that one down. But yeah, you'll get a lady frog. And if you get the lady frog all the way safely to the other side, you'll get extra points. Now, this is just a point-based system game. Of course, there's lives. You have five frogs, as opposed to most of these arcade games where you get 3 lives, like Pac-Man, you know, Space Invaders. You get 3 lives on those. Frogger, you got 5. You get the 2 extra tries. And it's again, it's just like any other arcade game. There's a point-based system try to get the high score, try to beat all the levels, try just figure out the strategy and the pattern to successfully win or beat the game. Because that's what you had to do back then. Especially with these arcade games, there was no strategy guide. Certainly was no internet. You just had to do it by yourself or hear it through the grapevine. Like, oh, do you know if you do this, this, and that, this will happen? And whether or not that was true, you tried it anyway because, I mean, there was no proof of that unless you tried it, you know? And I think it's cool on how far arcade gaming has come since, uh, the 80s. You know, Frogger is one of those games that got many ports, not as much as a few, like Pac-Man, I still think is the top of the mountain there when it comes to having numerous ports throughout the generations of gaming. But like Frogger, I got Frogger on the PlayStation 1, Frogger on the PlayStation 2, you know. And again, it's a classic arcade game, so it's just another game you can probably go and play on your browser. Just go to Google, type in Frogger, and find a way to play it with your keyboard, Because I don't think there's any buttons needed. You just need the joystick. You just need to move the frog across from one screen to the other side of the screen, you know? And I don't know. Remember if there was a Frogger game on the PS3, Xbox 360 generation. I don't remember if there is one, but I do know there are Game Boy games and maybe a DS. I think it's on a DS as well. I'm at 1,000% on that. But Frogger received ports, especially back in the day. Like it was on the I want to say it was on the ColecoVision and the Atari and the NES. I believe it was on the NES. Um, Turbo Graphics, and television. I think I don't know. It was published by Sega. That's a big game company. Still to this day, it produces and publishes a lot of games. They don't make consoles anymore, but when they did, I want to say Frogger might have been on the Sega Master System. I'm not 1,000% on that. I don't remember seeing it on the Genesis whatsoever. Of course, I can also just look it up. I'm sitting in front of a damn computer here. Because I don't recall Frogger being on the Super Nintendo. And usually, especially back then, they try to match everything up just to compete with each other. Like, sure, there was some exclusive differences, and of course, they had their exclusive games. Now, of course, we know just like PlayStation and Xbox, they try to keep the same level playing field, And as I was saying, you got Sonic for Sega, Mario for Nintendo. It's just a whole different world back then. When it comes to like your exclusives and your non-exclusives. Sorry, I'm fucking with my mic here. I think I'm laying on the cord. But like we all have our preferences, as I was trying to say here before the shit started being weird. But with Frogger being a Sega published game, I don't remember seeing Frogger on any Sega systems. It's definitely published by Sega for the arcades, but once it comes to other ports, I think it had other companies come under it to help put it on, like the Atari. Konami. That's the big name right there. Is Konami. We all know Konami and the games they made. Frogger is part of that, but I don't know. I should do my more research on this to see if it was on the 16-bit era, but you know, I think Frogger was mostly big on like the computer-based systems because that's where I played it originally was on the PC. I had the disc back in like the Windows 99 days and all that, Windows 2000. Uh, yeah, the only ports I'm seeing are for like ColecoVision, Atari, and Television, Commodore 64. Yeah, and then the Game Boy, like I stated earlier, was on the Game Boy. Yeah, so it wasn't on anything other than that. Like the only Nintendo system it's on, I'm seeing right here is the Game Boy. at least the original version. Of course, there was different Pac-Man, shit, Frogger games to be on other systems like the PS2 and PS1, and I think the Dreamcast may have had it. Uh, of course, the GameCube and whatnot. It's just like that. But it's those are different games for a different time. I'm talking about the original OG Frogger that started in the arcades and just went onto his computer-based systems. So it never really made it out of the 80s as far as the original goes. But the name Frogger itself went on into the 2000s, and this was a classic game that I always love to look back on because this was one of the very first uh, arcade games I've ever played. Sure, I played it on a computer, but it started on the arcade first. I think I played this before I played Pac-Man or Dig Dug or Space Invaders, just to name a few. And Frogger's been around since, well, as long as those games have. It's from the golden age of arcade gaming. When you think of like that time and like arcades in the 80s, you'll think games like Frogger and Pac-Man and Space Invaders and Asteroids and, Dig Dug. You just can't leave Frogger off the list, you know? And if you do, at least give it an honorable mention. Like everyone knows Frogger. It's a simple pick up and play game. A lot of these arcade games are pick up and play. Brain rot, You got a couple quarters in your pocket, you got a couple games to go. It was just that simple from a lot of games in that time. So simple that your 4-year old daughter can play it or your grandpa can play it. Like it's just that simple. Move one frog from one end to the other. So basically from the bottom of the screen to the very top, because it was always vertical. I don't think it was ever, or it was horizontal. I should say it was never vertical. Like you always had to move up and down, not left and right. But there was a lot of games inspired by Frogger. At least they have set somewhat of the same mechanics, like moving one side to the other. Like there's a Flash game that I did a Let's Play for called Let's Go Jaywalking, and I believe you have 50. I think it's 50, or is it 30? Oh god, I can't remember now. Of people. Of course, it's just simple, basic animations, a Flash game, but they're stick figures. But you have to move from one side of the highway to the other without getting ran over. The more people you get across the highway, the more points you get, the better. It's the same mechanic. It's the same mechanic. You're moving left to right instead of up and down. You don't have to worry about any obstacles other than the cars. And there's three different types of cars in that game. You got ones that move slow, ones that move, I guess, regular or medium, whatever you prefer, and then ones that move fast as shit. You know, Same thing with the Frogger. Like there was cars that moved different speeds. There were some things in the water that you couldn't stand on, like the logs that sunk underwater, or the alligator heads or crocodile heads, whatever they were. Like you couldn't just trust anything. It was about patience and timing and strategy in order to go from one side to the other. It wasn't just simply, oh, you got to cross the street. A little bit more than that, you know. And it's just a lot of these games have that, not just the nostalgia, but also just like the very base that every game can use as a foundation to build off of. Like I said, a Flash game from the late 2000s was mechanically was inspired by a game from the early 80s, a time before internet and all that stuff. Frogger is so simple that I mean, even the name, it's Frogger. Okay, it's obviously about a frog. you know if you never heard of it, you can base that concept. Okay, well, it's a game about a frog. What do you do? Oh, you just have to go from one side of the street to the other. Okay, that's the gist of the game. Now as far as I'm like, okay, we have to dodge obstacles and you know do precise timing and precise jumps so you don't die, lose all your lives. And like I said earlier, you'll get 5 lives, 5 frogs instead of 3 like most games have. But the same mechanic, you lose all those frogs, you lose all your lives, game over, back to the very beginning. Put another quarter in, put another token in, however you paid. There was need for like a guide or a walkthrough, especially with a lot of these games. Just go up there, grab the joystick, move up. That's it, move up. Sure, you can move left or right, but the objective is to get to the top of the screen, the other side of the street that you're on. Move up. That's it. No buttons, no controller, no cheat codes, no walkthroughs, no playthroughs, no guides, no nothing. Just move up. Time and precision. With a lot of these games, you got to figure out the pattern. You got to memorize the everything, not just a pattern, but also like your moves. Like, how did you, what kind of moves did you do? Like, did you hop into the middle of the street, scoot over 3 places to the right, and then scoot up again? Like it's just gotta memorize all that stuff to help you beat the game. If you have enough quarters to do so, sure you can get beginner's luck and beat the game with your first quarter. But how often was that? How often was that? There were no save states. There was no memory cards. It's you die, you die. That's it. Back to square one. And I stress that a lot with these arcade games, and I'm going to because if I have any younger viewers here that are used to external or not external, internal hard drives where you can save the game without any issues, or even save states nowadays. You have save states. None of that existed. You die, you don't go back to where you last were or to where you last saved. You go back to square one. If there's 10 levels in the game, you're on level 10 with your last life. You lose that life, you back at square one at level one, It was different. But that's why I love these games. That's why I love Frogger and on all this stuff, because like it kind of teaches you patience and a little bit of skill and strategy and critical thinking and all that stuff. Sure, it's a video game, but still, like it's also like basic problem solving, kind of in a way. It's like, okay, how am I going to win? How am I going to avoid losing my characters, losing my lives here, wasting my quarters? What can I do to make it different? That's what you do. You just gotta memorize the patterns. I brought up the movie Pixels by Adam Sandler at one of my arcade episodes, and basically he said the same thing. And I say Adam Sandler's from a time where arcades were all you had. Not everyone had Ataris in their house or Pong or whatever, but all the best games were at the arcade. You had to leave the house to go play them, and you just had to memorize the patterns, memorize everything, learn a strategy to order beat the game and be the best of the best, quote unquote. You know, it's it's called the golden age for a reason. All these games that we know today came out at the same time, almost at the same pace, and accumulated the amount of money they accumulated roughly at the same speed. And I say roughly because Frogger made a lot of money, but nowhere near as much as Pac-Man did. You know, but but it's still a game where a lot of people put their quarters in. There was a bit of a line that was kind of behind the kid playing to play the next life or whatever. Especially when it was new and it started catching on, and people were like, "Go check out this new game, Frogger." You're this frog and you got to cross the street without getting killed. Like what? Then they'll see it and they're like, "Oh," and they go up there and take their shot, put their quarters into the machine, and that's how it gains traction and income and all that stuff. So all the other arcades around the world can get their Frogger machine in. It's and I can't stress enough. It was developed by Konami. When I think Konami, I think like Contra. You know, when I think Sega, I think the 16-bit wars. You know, like these are two big names that had their fingerprints and their DNA all over this game. And that's kind of why it blew up the way it did. Because, I mean, at the time, especially at this time, the retro days, Konami and Sega knew exactly what they were doing. Konami's pumping games out left and right, especially in the 90s. Oh, man, in the 90s. Sega was Nintendo's biggest competition. They knew what they were doing. They put Nintendo to the test. Konami pumping games out left and right for both companies and arcades. Like it's just that was a great time to be a kid with all these games because like you just you walk into an arcade or if you had walk into a game store and you'll see all this stuff. You're like, shit, what do I play? What do I want? Where do I go first? You know? It's not like that no more, especially with all this digital gaming. Like you just go online and see like, oh, you know what, this game sounds interesting, it's cheap, I'll get it. Or, ooh, I've been waiting to play this game. I'll pay for it if I can $80 for one video game. That's such a different time. It is such a different time now. Like gaming, as of now, if you want to talk about it as a collective, now's a great time to be a gamer. Sure, you have your digital games. We also have your physical games. You have games all the way from the 80s you can play, even before then, like Pong in the 70s. You know, if you want to go back that far, you have the 90s with Sega and Nintendo and PlayStation. You have the 2000s where Xbox comes into play. You know, and you have all these streaming services to play. You know, it's just the golden age of arcade gaming brought up probably a big bump in the gaming uh not lore. That's not the right word to use, but more like the gaming, I guess, life. You want to call it that because there's nobody. I don't think anybody was really considered a gamer back then. Just a person who liked games. I don't think the term gamer was a coined term back then. You know, like oh, I just like to play Frogger. I like to play Asteroids. I like to play Defender. You know, versus like oh, I play PlayStation, Nintendo. Like I would love to see how life would have been if people were having collections like I have. You know, I have damn near 900 games in my collection here. What would that look like in the 80s when this game's out? You have about 900 arcades in your house? Well, fuck, you're rich. You know? I mean, shit. You everyone was considered rich if you walk in with more than $1 at the arcade. You walked in with $2 or more, you know. That's great. You're doing pretty good by yourself, kid. That's it. I'm just being honest here, but you know, I'm just gonna give the game its flowers, as I do all these other ones. You know, the biggest flaw I have, it's not exactly one of the fastest arcade games compared to the others. You know, it does move a bit slow, but the slowness does kind of help with your strategy a little bit. It's like, okay, Frogger isn't moving fast like Pac-Man does. He's moving like a frog. And I got to get him safely to the other side without killing him. But we all love Frogger. I hope we do. If you don't, it's whatever. You know, everyone has their preferences. You know, I like Frogger. I give it an honorable mention to my favorite arcade gaming. Uh, at least, and that'd be a fun episode to do my favorite arcade games. You know, but anyway, Frogger, this week's destination, memory lane. Be sure to follow my socials, Facebook and Instagram, Kevin Gill Gaming, and YouTube, also Kevin Gill Gaming. Uh, all my sources have the same profile picture, so you know you're at the right place. And I just want to give a shout out, especially to my YouTube. You know, I love the attention I'm getting on there, the traffic. It's awesome. You know, the likes, the shares, the comments, the subscribers. Like all those numbers are going up. Even with this podcast, the numbers are going up. You know, not as fast as my YouTube is, but it's still going up pretty good. You know, I just broke 160 downloads. That's pretty cool. You know, especially for something I do once a week. That's pretty cool to me. You know, followers are going up. You know, I just found out I'm in the top 30 at UAE, the United Arab Emirates. You know, that's pretty cool. You know, I didn't really think I was getting streamed like that in other countries. You know, other than here in the states because that's where I'm from. But it's pretty cool that this is getting traction, and I love it. You know, I'm just here talking about my favorite games, some of the facts about them, and what I love about them. That's all it is. Just me paying my homage to gaming, and just me being a nerd, a weirdo with the microphone. Anyways, you guys, I that this is cool. I love the support. And I'll see you all next week. Be sure to check out my YouTube where I upload almost every day. At least 6 days a week I'm uploading. All right, y'all. I'm out.